Hi Year 5 and 6. Are you ready for the next part of the story? I know I am. So, if you remember, in the last part of the story, Michael had met Kensuke. Kensuke had drawn a map of the island in the sand and had been very firm, telling Michael that Michael must stay at his end of the island. Kensuke would stay at his end of the island. Michael went back to his cave and wasn't feeling very happy. I took a long hard look at my situation. I was marooned on an island in the middle of nowhere, very probably with a madman for company and a bunch of howling monkeys, at least one orangutan amongst them. And God knows what else might be hidden in the forest. Millions of mosquitoes that would eat me alive every night. I knew only one thing. I had to get away. But how? How was I ever going to get off this island unless I could attract the attention of some passing ship? I could be here for the rest of my life. That thought didn't bear dwelling on. I wondered how long the old man had been on the island and what might have brought him here in the first place. Who was he? And who was he anyway to tell me what I could and couldn't do? And why had he put out my fire? I curled up in my cave, closed my eyes and just wished myself back home or back on the Peggy Sue with my mother and father. Such wonderful dreaming almost lulled me to sleep, but the mosquitoes and the howling from the forest soon dragged me back to consciousness, to face once again all the appalling implications of my wretched predicament. It came to me suddenly that I had seen the old man's face somewhere before. I had no idea how that could be. As I lay there pondering this, I felt the piece of glass in my pocket pressing into my hip. My spirits were suddenly lifted again. I still had my fire glass. I would build my fire, but this time somewhere he wouldn't discover it. I would wait for a ship to come, and until then I would survive. The old man had survived in this place. If he could do it, I could do it. And I could do it alone too. I didn't need him. I felt hungry again, and thirsty too. Tomorrow I would go into the forest and find food for myself. I would find water. Somehow or other I would catch fish too. I was good at fishing. If I could catch them in the reservoir back home and off the Peggy Sue, then I could catch them here. I spent that night cursing the hordes of whirring insects that were homing in on me, and the chattering forest that would not be silent, that would not let me be. I kept seeing the reservoir in my mind's eye, and my mother laughing in her skipper's cap. I felt tears coming and tried not to think of her. I thought of the old man. I was still trying to remember what he had said his name was when I fell asleep. I awoke and knew at once that he had been. It was as if I had dreamt it. Stella seemed to have dreamt the same dream, for at once she was bounding up on the rocks above the cave. She found what she clearly expected to be there, her bowl full of water. And there too, high on the shelf of rock beyond her, was the same upturned tin, my water bowl beside it, just as it had been the morning before. I knew it would be full. And I knew, as I lifted aside the tin, that the food would be there again. As I sat there, cross-legged on the rock, chewing ravenously on my fish and throwing pieces down for Stella to catch, I realised exactly what he meant to imply by this. We were not friends. We would not be friends. He would keep me alive, keep Stella alive, but only so long as I lived by his rules. I had to keep to my end of the island, and I must never light fires. It was all quite clear. With any real hope of immediate rescue diminishing day by day, I became more and more resigned. I knew I had no choice but to accept his terms and go along with his regime for the moment. He had now marked out a frontier, a boundary line in the sand from the forest down to the sea on both sides of the island, and he renewed it frequently, as often as it needed to be. Stella strayed over it, of course. I couldn't prevent her, but I did not. It wasn't worth it. In spite of the animosity I had seen in his eyes and that huge knife in his belt, I didn't really think he would ever hurt me, but I was frightened by him, and because of that, and because I had too much to lose, I did not want to confront him. After all, he was providing every day for us, all the food and all the water we needed. I was beginning to find some edible fruit for myself, in particular a prickly shelled fruit, rambutan I later discovered. It was delicious, but I could never find enough, and besides, Stella would not eat it. I found the occasional coconut still intact, but often both the milk and flesh were foul. Once or twice I even tried climbing for them, but they were always too high, and I very soon gave up. I tried fishing in the shallows, fashioning a crude spear, a long stick I had sharpened on a rock, but I was always too slow in my strike. There was often plenty of fish, but they were too small and too fast. So, like it or not, we still very much needed the daily ration of fish and fruit and water the old man was bringing us. I had searched my end of the island for fresh water, but could find none. I thought often of trespassing into the old man's part of the forest to look for it, but I dared not. For the most part, I kept close to the forest tracks. It wasn't only the old man's laws, nor the howling of the monkeys, which I came to understand as a warning, that prevented me from venturing into his side of the island. It was the orangutan too. He had seemed placid enough, but I had no idea how he or his friends might react if they found me in their territory. I kept wondering too what other creatures might lurk unseen, waiting to ambush me in the dark damp of the forest. If the constant jungle talk was anything to go by, the place was crawling with all sorts of dreadful creatures. Just the thought of the orangutan and the terrors of the unknown forest were quite enough to deter me, enough to stifle both my curiosity and my courage. So I kept largely to my beach, my cave, and the forest track up to my hilltop.